All right, thank you very much, Shirley and Dan, for this particular event. I think it's needed for a lot of African scholars, having been in Africa and experienced all the type of challenges of publishing and all that. So yeah, I'm just going to share my experience, and I'm not going to repeat what has been said, because a lot have been said about how you can go about publishing, which is very valuable. So more like going to share my own experience as a way of complementing what the panelists have, shared with all of us. So I remember I started my PhD around 2011. So I'm not going to go take long. So if you want to a detailed, more like discussion around my PhD experience, there's a podcast I did with Ajay. I'm going to share the link so you can then listen to it and have more like a long, it was more like an hour talk about my PhD experience. So I'm just going to share be very brief with it. So when I started studying terrorism, I started for my PhD, started studying terrorism. It was in 2011 then, and by the time engaged the literature, there was a lot that has been done written about terrorism, right? And I wanted to do something really different, right? And I and one of the first things that I did, of course, was to engage the literature. You have to be on top of the literature, not in terrorism studies. And so I started engaging the literature a lot, and to the point that you engage the literature to the point that you can really identify the trend, the debate in the field. I can easily say, okay, these are works from critical terrorism scholars, and these are work from mainstream researchers. These are the type of arguments they're making. You should be able to more like have a way of identifying the current debates in the field. So when you engage in the literature on terrorism, and so that's one of the first things that I did. And at some point, what I also then did was to reach out to some scholars, renowned scholars in the field of terrorism studies. And so I wrote them letters and I shared with them what I was planning to do. And so I got that response, in terms of them showing or saying that, okay, this particular area of your research has not been studied, and this is something that is interesting. And that gave me the confidence because, like I said, a lot has been written about terrorism at the time. A lot have been written, and there are a lot of event-based studies, on terrorism, all kinds of things. And so when I got that particular response, sharing from those scholars, particularly, I looked at because I was looking at the intersection between counterterrorism and civil society, right? And so I know that there are leading scholars that have had that conversation, that started that conversation around after 9/11. There were all kinds of scholars who were looking at the effects of counterterrorism policies on civil society organizations, closing of civic spaces, and all of that. And so I reached out to those scholars who have published their works were out there, and they were the ones who told me, "Oh, this is a very good way that you're coming." I remember a particular scholar it was in Oxford, who, when I sent an email, he said when he read my email about terrorism, his heart sank. But then when he then read through and saw the angle which I was looking at it, then he felt like this is a good work. And so with all of those comments from those researchers, I was able to then draft a proposal, a full proposal, right? And then after drafting a proposal, and that was after years of engaging the literature on terrorism study. Yeah, and because we have these structural barriers in terms of access to resources, so it would take a long time for you to have those materials and study and engage the literature. And so afterwards, the next thing I did was to look out for a fellowship, you know. Like the Social Science Research Council Fellowship there, because I mean the PhD is very expensive, right? Particularly in Africa, you need money to do the PhD. At the time I started my PhD, I was funding it by myself. At some point, I wanted to drop out because I just can't afford it anymore. And so, but I've applied to a lot of those fellowships, like the Social Science Research Council fellowships, and was accepted. My proposal was accepted. I got those fellowship. I got the fund to do my research, and so the good thing about the Social Science Research Council, that's the Next Generation. Next Generation Social Science in Africa Fellowship is that you have to undergo various forms of workshops where you get to learn all kinds of things in terms of academic writing, how to write, and a lot of how to engage. I mean, there are a lot of things that you're taught within that in those workshops, in terms of your not just your the themes of your own research, but in terms of how you approach them, in terms of how you write a literature review, in terms of your methods, how you write your methods. So all of those workshops were very empowering for me. I remember the first trip was in Ghana, and the conversations we had, because they bring in scholars from different parts of Africa, and the world, and they bring them to that workshop to which you engage with them one-on-one within and after the workshop. So the Social Science Research Council workshops were very defining. And after those workshops, and of course you're going through your PhD, of course you had fun to go to the field and do all of those things, drawing from the knowledge you've acquired from all of those conversations. And then, of course, you then have to write your manuscripts, but then don't be so keen to send it out to publish. Well, another thing that I did was to submit these manuscripts for conference presentations, right? And so I remember one of the first, I think the first one, okay, the first conference was I think it was in London at King's College, and then another one, International Society for Tech Sector Research in Stockholm. And one of the good things about those workshops is that you get to meet these pioneering scholars in your field one-on-one. I remember when I presented my one of the papers from my PhD thesis, and I was mentioning the names of these scholars without knowing them. I've read their works and all of that. But after the presentation, they came to me and introduced themselves, that I'm so person that you mentioned in your whatever. And it was really very good in the sense that I was able to see these literature, or those who engage in literature in person, and have a one-on-one conversation with them and build that relationship, that network that is very important with these scholars. Afterwards I was still writing them, they were still responding. And so yeah, so that was and also during those conferences they have platforms where you can teach you a lot of things about how to publish in their journals, because the International Society for Tech Social Research has this journal called Voluntas, one of the leading journals in civil society studies or so. And so yeah, I had that, participated in that workshops, attended the conference and everything. So it also, that was more like the last stage of it for me. And after I came back and I started submitting my papers to all of these journals, right? I sent to volunteers, I sent to, yeah. So I remember when I got my first revise and resubmit, it was scary for me. I mean, I had to, think about it. So once you get your review, you don't just rush into it. Leave it for a bit and go and do other things and come back to it, right? So give it some time so that you understand what the reviewers are saying. Like, you try to put yourself in the minds of the reviewers, really understand them, and that's one of the challenges that you would often face. Sometimes some of the ways in which they write are not very, very clear. And so you're trying to understand what they mean. And one of the things I did was also to my this feedback to my peers, to get a different perspective. What exactly is this reviewer saying? What does he want me to do here? I think we did a lot of peer mentoring, right? And that's one of the key things that was also very valuable for me, peer mentoring. And so sharing those feedbacks and getting to hear from different perspectives of what exactly are these reviewers trying to see, what are they trying to say, try to understand them before you respond to it. And so once you're able to get a good grasp of what all the things they are saying, you can then respond to all of these. I mean, write your paper, having all of those feedbacks in mind as you re-articulate them and write them, and of course, you send them back. So these have been very, 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 very helpful. And also, one of the things that I did was also to check out who are the journal editors, the editorial board. What are the type of research that they are doing? How is the research is relevant to the type of research that I'm doing? Because there is a tendency that when you submit your paper, they are likely going to assign it to a particular editor, to editor that has expertise in your field or your geographical area to be able to read and make a decision. And so I did that a lot, like look at the editorial, but look at the type of, and also look at the trend of conversations in the journal. What are the type of things they have published recently? And so that is also very defining, in terms of how you, where you, in terms of picking a journal for your paper. And so I did all of that, and it worked. But then in terms of review process, I think it's why some journals will tell you, oh yeah, we have this turnaround that is very fast and things like that. It might not, I mean, it might take longer time for, I remember a particular article took 3 years for it to be published. So it took a long time, back and forth, write it this way. Even sometimes the journals and the editors, they contradict themselves, right? And so I have to be patient in terms of how, and also take all of those things. And it was a learning process for me. I learned a lot, but in that particular paper. So learned a whole lot about methods, about writing, styles of writing, and the type of things that editors and journal editors they want. And so yeah, so that's and that was one of the leading journals in my field too. So yeah, so it helped a lot. Even, I mean, to being patient and take all of those advice, take all of those comments, and don't I mean, yeah, take all of those comments in terms of rewriting your papers and resubmitting them. So that also worked for me in terms of publishing. So there are also other issues that I want to talk about, but because of time, I cannot. In terms of the type of challenges that you face, that most of the challenges that you are experiencing now, I experienced them. So it wasn't all a smooth sail for me. It was very difficult. It's not just about publishing, it's also about studying for a PhD, the structural challenges that we face in Africa, the lack of funding, and you, if you're not lucky to win any of those African based fellowship, it's going to be a lot more difficult, right? Because you don't have that resources available to that would help you, not just financially, but in terms of other funds academically that would help your research. So there are all kinds of challenges that you face, and there's also the challenge of work. I mean, some of the scholars are already teaching in private universities, and we know that most of those private universities are teaching focus. So you're teaching five, you'll be teaching 5 courses in a semester. If you're teaching 5 courses in a semester or modules in a semester, there's no way you can be able to do research, right? So those are the type of challenges that you would often face, and you'd have to make a decision. Do I want to be more like a lecturer just to teach alone, or do I want to do research? And that is also go a long way to define. For me, I took a very, what you might say, extreme approach. I refused to take up any private jobs in private universities in Nigeria because I didn't want anything to hamper with my research. So I relied on the funding that I got in Social Science Research Council to support myself throughout the course of my research. I know the danger of, teaching. Teaching is a lot of a very, very demanding. And so it's going to take a lot of your time. There might not be enough time for you to engage in research. So, I'll just stop here. So I'm now welcome questions, around the type of challenges that you face, and we're going to look at it and then provide my advice in terms of how you can be able to mitigate all of these challenges. Thank you very much.